What if the most important day of your life was a lie? For one New York City florist, a dream wedding gig turned into a real-life soap opera. She was just there to arrange the flowers, an invisible artist behind a $1 million spectacle. But when the handsome millionaire groom, standing at the altar, looked past his beautiful bride and locked eyes with her, everything shattered. He threw the diamond ring, not at his fiancée, but away from her. In front of hundreds of shocked guests, he walked straight to the florist, and what he did next will leave you breathless. The air in the plaza's grand ballroom was thick with the scent of 1,000 white roses, a fragrance so potent it felt like a physical weight. Rosalie Monroe felt it pressing on her chest, a sweet, suffocating perfume of a life she could only ever glimpse from the service entrance. For 3 days she had lived and breathed this wedding, her small floral business, Petal and Stem, commissioned for the society event of the year, the union of Arabella Vanderbilt and Everett Cain. Arabella was exactly the kind of bride Rosalie was used to, a woman who wielded her family name like a weapon, whose requests were delivered with the casual authority of someone who had never been told no. The Vanderbilts were old money, their legacy etched into the very foundations of New York City. They didn't just host parties, they curated experiences, and Arabella's wedding was to be her masterpiece. She wanted a winter wonderland in spring, a concept that had Rosalie and her small team working around the clock, coaxing stubborn blossoms into an icy fantasy of white and silver. Rosalie, on the other hand, was the product of a different New York. The daughter of a subway conductor and a seamstress from Queens, her world was one of walk-up apartments and budget spreadsheets. Petal and Stem was her baby, born from a passion for nature's artistry and nurtured with relentless hard work. Landing the Vanderbilt Cain wedding was a coup, a chance to finally elevate her business beyond the boutique weddings of Brooklyn hipsters. But it came at a cost. Arabella had micromanaged every petal, every ribbon, her critiques sharp and dismissive. Rosalie's hands, raw and pricked by thorns, were a testament to her dedication. But to Arabella, she was just the flower girl. The groom Everett Cain was a more enigmatic figure. He was new money, a tech wunderkind who had sold his AI startup to Google for a figure that made even the Vanderbilts' heads turn. He was impossibly handsome, with a sharp jawline and eyes the color of a stormy sea. Rosalie had only seen him in brief, fleeting moments during the setup, a flash of a tailored suit, a low murmur of a voice on the phone. He seemed detached. While Arabella flitted about, issuing decrees, Everett often stood by the grand windows, his gaze lost in the traffic flowing around Grand Army Plaza, a man present in body but absent in spirit. On the morning of the wedding, the ballroom was a breathtaking spectacle. Crystal trees dripped with orchids, garlands of roses cascaded from the balconies, and the aisle was a pristine carpet of white petals. It was perfect. Rosalie, dressed in her functional black uniform, made one last round, her fingers gently adjusting a stray leaf, her heart swelling with a quiet pride. This was her art. "It's acceptable," a cool voice said from behind her. Rosalie turned to see Arabella, a vision in a custom Vera Wang gown that shimmered like captured moonlight. Her blonde hair was swept into an intricate chignon, and diamonds glittered at her throat. She surveyed the room with a critical eye, her lips pursed. "Thank you, Miss Vanderbilt," Rosalie said, her voice carefully neutral. "The hydrangeas on the third table seem a bit limp," Arabella noted, pointing a perfectly manicured finger. "See to it." Rosalie bit back the retort that the hydrangeas were perfectly hydrated and had been treated with the utmost care. Instead, she just nodded. "Of course." As Arabella swept away, her silk train whispering over the petal-strewn floor, Rosalie felt a familiar pang of invisibility. She was a creator of beauty, but she was never meant to be part of the beautiful world she created. The ceremony was set to begin. The guests, a who's who of New York's elite, filled the gilded chairs. The murmur of conversation was a low hum of power and influence. Rosalie took her position near the back, by a service door, ready to handle any last-minute floral emergencies. From her vantage point, she could see the altar, a magnificent archway of woven birch branches and cascading white phalaenopsis orchids. The string quartet began to play Pachelbel's canon, the classic, inevitable choice. The groom, Everett Cain, walked to the altar with his best man. In his tuxedo, he was even more striking. But Rosalie noticed something else, a tension in his shoulders, a tightness around his mouth. He wasn't a happy groom. He looked like a man walking to his own execution. Then came the bride. The room rose to its feet as Arabella, on the arm of her proud, formidable father, began her procession. She was radiant, a flawless bride for a flawless wedding. But as she walked down the aisle, her eyes fixed on her prize, Everett's gaze drifted. It was a strange magnetic pull. Across the sea of faces, his eyes, lost in searching, found Rosalie's. It was only for a second, a fleeting connection in a room of hundreds. But in that second, Rosalie saw something she didn't expect. A flicker of recognition, a desperate plea. It was as if he was seeing her for the first time, not as the florist, but as a person. The air crackled, and for a moment, the suffocating scent of roses was replaced by the sharp, electric tang of ozone. Rosalie's heart hammered against her ribs. She dropped her gaze, her cheeks flushing. It was nothing, she told herself. A trick of the light, a groom's nerves. Arabella reached the altar, and her father placed her hand in Everett's. The officiant began to speak, the words of familiar, soothing balm of tradition and commitment. But Rosalie couldn't shake the feeling of Everett's eyes on her. She risked a glance. He wasn't looking at his bride, he was looking at her. The ceremony progressed, a blur of practiced words and ancient rituals. Then came the rings. The best man produced a velvet box. Everett took out a diamond ring so large it seemed to bend the light, a gaudy symbol of his immense wealth. He turned to Arabella, his hand trembling slightly. Everett, he began, his voice hoarse. He cleared his throat. He stopped. The silence stretched, thin and taut. Arabella's smile faltered. Her father in the front row stiffened. A ripple of confusion went through the guests. Everett's eyes lifted from the ring, from his bride, and once again, they found Rosalie. This time there was no mistaking it. It was a look of pure, unadulterated desperation. And then he did the unthinkable. With a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head, he closed his hand around the ring. He turned, not to Arabella, but to the side, and with a flick of his wrist, he threw the multi-million-dollar diamond ring. It flew in a glittering arc, not towards his intended, but into the dense foliage of a large floral arrangement near the wall, one of Rosalie's own creations. A collective gasp swept the room. Arabella stared, her face a mask of disbelief. Her father shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. But Everett didn't seem to notice. He took a step away from the altar, away from his stunned bride, and started walking. Not up the aisle, but toward the back of the room, towards the service door, towards her. Each step he took seemed to echo in the cavernous silence. The string quartet had faltered into a discordant mess of notes. The guests were frozen, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. This was better than theater. This was real. Rosalie stood, rooted to the spot, her mind unable to process what was happening. It felt like a dream, a bizarre, rose-scented nightmare. He was walking towards her. The millionaire groom, the tech genius, the man who was supposed to be marrying a Vanderbilt, was walking straight towards her. He stopped in front of her, his stormy eyes boring into hers. The world seemed to shrink until it was just the two of them, standing in the doorway between two different worlds. The scent of roses was gone, replaced by the faint, clean scent of his cologne. "I know you," he said, his voice low and intense, a stark contrast to the chaos erupting behind him. Rosalie could only stare, her mouth dry, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Behind them, the dam of decorum finally broke. "Everett, what is the meaning of this?" Mr. Vanderbilt roared. Arabella let out a choked sob, a sound of pure, humiliated fury. "Everett!" But Everett didn't turn. He kept his eyes on Rosalie, a strange, sad smile touching his lips. He reached into his tuxedo pocket and pulled out not another ring, but a small, worn object. He pressed it into her hand. It was a dried flower, a single, perfectly preserved petal of a wildflower, a Queen Anne's lace. "I can't do this," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I can't marry her." Not when I finally found you. And then, in front of the cream of New York society, in the middle of his own ruined wedding, the millionaire groom, Everett Cain, sank to one knee before the florist. I don't even know your name, he said, his voice thick with a decade of unspoken feelings. But I know your soul. Will you marry me? The grand ballroom of the plaza erupted into chaos. But for Rosalie, standing there with a dried flower in her palm and a millionaire at her feet, the world had gone completely silent. The silence in Rosalie's mind was shattered by a sound she would never forget. The raw, guttural scream of Arabella Vanderbilt. It was a sound stripped of all poise and polish, a primal cry of fury and humiliation that clawed at the gilded ceiling of the grand ballroom. "You!" Arabella shrieked, her face contorted, the picture of bridal perfection dissolving into a mask of rage. She pointed a trembling finger at Rosalie, her diamond-encrusted nails like tiny daggers. "You! You nobody! You did this!" Chaos erupted. Guests surged to their feet, their iPhones held aloft. The initial shock giving way to the frenzied excitement of witnessing a scandal unfold in real time. The flashes were blinding. Mr. Vanderbilt, his face the color of a ripe plum, was charging towards them, his security detail struggling to keep pace. "Get up, you fool!" he bellowed at Everett. "Get up and fix this!" But Everett remained on one knee, his eyes never leaving Rosalie's, a small, defiant island in a sea of pandemonium. He was waiting for an answer to a question so insane, so utterly world-altering, that Rosalie couldn't even form a coherent thought. Her gaze dropped to the object in her hand, the dried Queen Anne's lace. It was so fragile, so out of place amidst the opulence and the drama. But it sparked something, a flicker of a memory buried deep, from a time before petal and stem, before the endless hustle, a time of sun-drenched fields and youthful dreams. Who are you?" she finally managed to whisper, her voice barely audible over the din. Before Everett could answer, a wall of navy blue suits descended upon them. Mr. Vanderbilt's security, grim-faced and efficient, formed a cordon, separating them from the baying crowd. One of them, a man with a jaw like a steel trap, spoke into his wrist. "Package is secure. Escort them out. Now!" Everett was pulled to his feet. Another guard took Rosalie by the arm, his grip firm but not unkind. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us." They were bustled out of the ballroom, through a maze of service corridors that smelled of old champagne and cleaning fluid. The roar of the crowd faded, replaced by the frantic squawking of the security guards' radios. They emerged into the cool, damp air of a loading bay, a stark contrast to the perfumed atmosphere of the wedding. A black SUV, sleek and menacing, was waiting, its engine humming. "Get in!" the steel-jawed guard commanded. Everett, his face a grim mask, got in one side. Rosalie, her mind still reeling, was ushered in the other. The doors slammed shut, cocooning them in a world of tinted windows and rich leather. The SUV sped away, leaving the chaos of the plaza behind. For a long time they sat in silence, the only sound the swish of the tires on the wet pavement. Rosalie stared out the window, watching the familiar streets of Manhattan blur into an abstract painting of light and shadow. She felt like she had been ripped from her own life and thrust into someone else's movie. Finally, Everett spoke, his voice quiet. "My name is Everett Cain, and you are Rosalie. You used to spend your summers at a camp in the Catskills, Camp Pinewood. You were the girl who knew the name of every flower." Rosalie's head snapped towards him. Camp Pinewood. She hadn't thought of that place in years. It was a world away, a lifetime ago. A camp for underprivileged city kids, a 2-week escape from the concrete jungle. She had been a counselor there, the summer after her freshman year of college. "How?" she began, her voice trembling. "I was there too," he said, a faint nostalgic smile on his face. "But I wasn't Everett Cain then. I was just Jay, the quiet kid from the Bronx who was terrified of everything, especially the other kids." He paused, his eyes distant. "You were the only one who was kind to me. You didn't laugh when I couldn't swim. You taught me how to skip stones. And you gave me this." He gestured to the dried flower still clutched in her hand. "I had scraped my knee and you made a poultice from some leaves. Then you found a Queen Anne's lace and told me it was a nature's bandage. You said it was a sign that even the most delicate things could be strong. The memory, fuzzy and distant, began to sharpen in Rosalie's mind. A skinny, dark-haired boy with big, scared eyes. Jay. He had followed her around like a shadow, his silence a comfortable counterpoint to her own chatter about botany and art. She had felt a strange kinship with him, a shared sense of not quite belonging. I remember you, she breathed, the realization dawning on her. Jay, you were the one who was so good at drawing. I still am, he said softly. You told me I should be an artist. You were the first person who ever believed in me. The SUV pulled to a stop. They were in a private underground garage. Everett led her to an elevator, which opened directly into a sprawling penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking, panoramic view of Central Park. The space was minimalist and modern, a stark contrast to the Vanderbilt's old-world opulence. It was a space that belonged to a tech mogul, not a quiet boy from the Bronx. What happened to you, Jay? She asked, her voice full of a million unasked questions. How did you become this? Everett ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a gesture of weariness that seemed to crack his polished facade. It's a long story. After that summer, my life changed. My mother, who had been struggling for years, finally left my abusive father. We moved away. And then, I got lucky. I discovered I had a knack for computers. I taught myself to code. The rest, as they say, is history. He walked to the window, his back to her. But I never forgot that summer. I never forgot you. You were a beacon of kindness in a world that had shown me very little of it. Over the years, I tried to find you, but I didn't know your last name. All I had was a memory and a dried flower. He turned to face her, his eyes raw with emotion. When I saw you at the wedding, it was like a ghost from another life, a better life. I realized in that moment that I was making the biggest mistake of my life. Arabella, our marriage was a merger, not a romance. A business deal to consolidate power and influence. I was selling my soul. The weight of his words settled on Rosalie. This wasn't just a case of cold feet. This was a man who had been on a path he never chose, a path that led him to a life of unimaginable wealth but profound unhappiness. Suddenly his phone buzzed, a harsh, insistent sound that broke the spell. He glanced at the screen, his face hardening. It's my lawyer. The Vanderbilts are not taking this well. An understatement of the century. The Vanderbilts were not just a family, they were an institution, and Everett had just publicly humiliated them in the most spectacular way possible. They're filing a lawsuit, he said, his voice grim. Breach of contract, defamation, infliction of emotional distress. They're going to try to ruin me. He looked at Rosalie, his expression a mixture of fear and determination. And they're going to come after you too. The reality of her situation hit Rosalie with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't just a bystander in this drama anymore. She was a central character, the nobody who had stolen the Millionaire Groom. Her business, her reputation, her quiet, carefully constructed life. It was all in jeopardy. Why? She asked, her voice small. Why would you do this? Why would you drag me into this mess? Because I had to, he said, his voice ringing with a conviction that startled her. I've spent the last 10 years of my life building an empire, but I lost myself along the way. Seeing you again, it was a reminder of who I used to be, who I still want to be. I know this is insane. I know I have no right to ask this of you. But that proposal, I meant it. I don't want to be Everett Cain, the tech mogul anymore. I just want to be Jay, the boy who found a kindred spirit in a field of wildflowers. Before Rosalie could respond, a news alert flashed on the giant television screen on the wall. It was a picture of her, a grainy cell phone shot from the wedding, her face a mask of shock and confusion. The headline screamed, "The mystery woman who stole the Cain fortune. Who is the wedding crasher?" Her name, Rosalie Monroe, was plastered underneath. Her business, Petal and Stem, was named. In a matter of minutes, her life had been turned upside down, broadcast to the world as a tawdry tale of a gold-digging homewrecker. A new wave of panic washed over her. The Vanderbilts were not just going to sue, they were going to destroy her. And she was standing in the penthouse of the man who had lit the match. She looked at Everett, at Jay, the boy she had once known, and the man he had become. He had offered her a fairy tale, but it was a fairy tale with a very dark side. A side with lawyers and lawsuits and a powerful, vengeful family. "I have to go," she said, her voice shaking. "I can't be here. I can't be a part of this." She turned to leave, but Everett's voice stopped her. "Before you go," he said, his tone urgent, "there's something else you need to know. Something about Arabella, about the Vanderbilts. It's not just about a broken engagement. It's about why I was marrying her in the first place." He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself for a confession. "My company, the one I sold to Google, it was built on a lie, and the Vanderbilts know it. Marrying Arabella was the price of their silence." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Marrying Arabella was the price of their silence. Rosalie froze, her hand on the doorknob of the penthouse. This was no longer a simple story of a runaway groom. It was a dark, tangled web of secrets and lies, and she was caught in the center of it. "What lies?" she asked, turning back to face him. The view of Central Park, so beautiful just moments before, now seemed menacing. A concrete jungle where predators roamed in tailored suits. Everett's face was pale, the confident facade of the tech mogul stripped away to reveal the scared boy from the Bronx. "My AI algorithm," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "The one that made me a billionaire. It wasn't entirely mine." He paced the length of the vast living room, the city lights painting shifting patterns on the polished floor. "I had a partner in the beginning, a brilliant coder named Ben Carter. We were roommates, working out of our dorm room. The core of the algorithm, the revolutionary part, it was his. We were going to build the company together." He stopped, his fists clenched at his sides. But Ben was troubled. He struggled with depression, and one night, after a particularly bad argument with his family, he took his own life. Rosalie gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "There was no note," Everett continued, his voice thick with guilt. "Just a laptop full of code. I was devastated, but I was also ambitious. I saw a path to everything I ever wanted. So I told myself he would have wanted me to continue. I took his work, refined it, and passed it off as my own." He finally looked at her, his eyes pleading for understanding. "I built my entire empire on a dead man's genius, and for 10 years I got away with it." "But the Vanderbilts know?" Rosalie prompted, her mind racing to connect the pieces. "They didn't," he clarified. "Not until recently. Arabella's father, Richard Vanderbilt, is a ruthless businessman. He invests in everything, knows everyone. He has a whole department of people who do nothing but dig up dirt on potential rivals and partners. About 6 months ago, they found it. An old email server from our college days. Emails between me and Ben, discussing the code. Proof that the intellectual property was, at best, co-owned. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. The detached groom, the loveless engagement, the palpable tension. It was all a sham, a high-stakes business negotiation disguised as a society wedding. "So they blackmailed you," Rosalie stated, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "Marry Arabella. Merge your new money with their old name, and they would keep your secret." "Exactly," Everett confirmed, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "It was a perfect solution for them. They'd get a son-in-law with a direct line to Silicon Valley's wealth, and I'd get to keep my reputation, my fortune, everything I'd built. I told myself it was just business. That love was a luxury I couldn't afford." He walked towards her, his eyes full of a desperate sincerity. "But then I saw you, Rosalie, standing there, so real, so pure. You were a reminder of a time when I wasn't this hollowed-out version of myself. I couldn't go through with it. I couldn't sell my soul, not even for $1 billion. The revelation was staggering. Everett wasn't just a conflicted groom. He was a man trapped in a gilded cage of his own making. And by running, he hadn't just jilted a bride. He had declared war on one of the most powerful families in the country, a war they were already fighting with terrifying efficiency. Rosalie's phone, which she had silenced during the wedding setup, was now lighting up with a relentless barrage of notifications. News alerts, social media tags, frantic texts from her friends and family. Her face was everywhere, her name a trending topic. The narrative had been set. She was the villain, the calculating homewrecker. One headline from a particularly vicious gossip blog read, "From petals to penthouses, Florist's plot to snag a billionaire." The article was a masterpiece of character assassination, filled with anonymous sources who painted her as a desperate social climber who had targeted Everett from the moment she got the wedding gig. They even twisted her hard-earned success with petal and stem into evidence of her ambition, a stepping stone to a bigger prize. "They're destroying me," she whispered, scrolling through the vitriol, her hands shaking. "My business. My life." "I won't let them," Everett said, his voice regaining a sliver of its usual command. "I have the best lawyers, the best PR team. We can fight this." But how could they fight a lie with a truth that was even more scandalous? The story of a blackmail plot and stolen intellectual property was far more damaging than a simple affair. The next few days were a blur of crisis management. Everett's penthouse became a war room, a fortress against the storm raging outside. Lawyers in sharp suits came and went, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. A public relations expert, a formidable woman named Diana, was hired to try and salvage their reputations. Her advice was blunt. They needed to control the narrative. "Right now, you're the other woman and he's the cheating groom," Diana said, her eyes flitting between them. "We need to change that. We need to present a new story, a story of a long-lost love, a destiny fulfilled. It's cheesy, but it's better than what the Vanderbilts are selling." And so, against her better judgment, Rosalie found herself playing a part in another elaborate production. A carefully orchestrated interview with a sympathetic journalist was arranged. In it, they told a sanitized version of their story, the tale of Jay and Rosalie, two kids from different worlds who found a connection at a summer camp, a connection that was never forgotten. Everett's proposal was framed not as a rash impulse, but as a man finally choosing his heart over a loveless, arranged marriage. It was a story that was part truth, part fiction, and it made Rosalie deeply uncomfortable. She was a florist, a creator of tangible beauty. Now she was a character in a media-spun fairy tale, her life no longer her own. The public reaction was mixed. Some were enchanted by the romantic tale, while others decried it as a transparent PR stunt. But it did what Diana intended. It introduced doubt. It muddied the waters. The Vanderbilts, however, were relentless. Their lawsuit was officially filed, a document thick with accusations and threats. They leaked select emails between Everett and Arabella, emails that painted him as a cold, calculating partner, further fueling the fire. And they came after petal and stem. One by one, Rosalie's corporate clients and future wedding bookings began to cancel. The reason was always the same. They couldn't be associated with the scandal. Her small business, the one she had poured her blood, sweat, and tears into, was crumbling. One evening, after another day of legal battles and bad press, Rosalie found herself on the penthouse terrace, staring down at the city that had once felt so full of promise. The weight of it all was crushing. Everett found her there, a cashmere blanket in his hands. He gently draped it over her shoulders. "I'm so sorry, Rosalie," he said, his voice heavy with remorse. "I never wanted this for you." "I know," she said, her voice small, "but I don't know if I can do this, Jay. This isn't my world. I feel like I'm losing myself in your drama." "Then let's escape it," he said, his voice suddenly urgent. "Let's leave New York. We can go anywhere. I have enough money to start over 100 times. We can find a quiet place, a place where you can have a garden, and I can just be Jay." The offer was tempting. A new life, away from the prying eyes of the media and the wrath of the Vanderbilts. A chance to see if the connection they shared, the fragile bond forged in a summer long ago, could actually grow into something real. But as she looked at him, at this man who was willing to give up his empire for her, a new unsettling thought took root in her mind. It was a detail from his confession, a piece of the story that didn't quite fit. Jay, she said slowly, her brow furrowed. You said Ben Carter, your partner. He had a family. You said he had an argument with them before he died. Yes, Everett confirmed, a shadow passing over his face. His parents never approved of his hobbies. They wanted him to be a doctor or a lawyer. Did you ever meet them, she asked. After he died? Everett shook his head. Number I couldn't face them. I sent a check to a funeral home, anonymously. It was cowardly, I know. What was their name? Rosalie pressed, a strange, cold feeling creeping up her spine. Ben's family. What was their name? Everett looked at her, confused by her sudden intensity. I don't know why it matters, but it was Smith. A common name. They lived somewhere in upstate New York, I think. Rosalie's blood ran cold. Smith. Upstate New York. It couldn't be. It was too much of a coincidence. She thought of her own family. Her mother's sister, her Aunt Sarah, who had married a man named David Smith. A man who had a son from a previous marriage. A son who was brilliant and troubled. A son who had died tragically in college. A cousin she had never met, but whose ghost had haunted her family gatherings for years. Jay, she said, her voice trembling, her heart pounding with a terrible, dawning horror. What did Ben look like? Everett frowned, trying to conjure the image of his long-lost friend. He had sandy brown hair, he said slowly, and glasses, and he had this gap between his two front teeth. The world tilted on its axis. Rosalie stumbled back, the cashmere blanket slipping from her shoulders. She had seen that face before, in old photographs on her aunt's mantelpiece. The sandy hair, the glasses, the gap-toothed smile of a boy she never knew. Ben Carter, her cousin. The man whose work Everett had stolen, the ghost on which his entire empire was built, was her own flesh and blood. The revelation struck Rosalie not like a lightning bolt, but like the slow, crushing Ad Monroe of a glacier, freezing the air in her lungs and pressing the life from her. The glittering cityscape below, a symbol of infinite possibility just moments before, warped into a dizzying, malevolent smear of light. Her mind frantically tried to reject the words, to find a flaw in the horrifying logic, but the pieces fit together with the sickening click of a coffin lid shutting. Ben Carter was my cousin, she whispered. The words felt like swallowing shards of glass, alien and monstrous on her tongue. They didn't belong to her, to this life, to this penthouse high above the world. They belonged to a quiet, grief-stricken corner of her family history she had only ever observed from a respectful distance. Everett stared, his face a canvas of disbelief, slowly giving way to dawning horror. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him ashen, a ghost in his own home. No, he breathed, the word a desperate, hollow puff of air. He shook his head, a jerky, mechanical motion, as if trying to physically dislodge the impossible thought. No, Rosalie, that's not possible. It can't be. My Aunt Sarah, Rosalie continued, her voice gaining a frantic, hysterical edge as the architecture of her life crumbled and reformed into a new, monstrous shape. She married David Smith. He had a son from his first marriage, Benjamin Smith. Everyone called him Ben. He was a prodigy, a genius with computers, but he was fragile. He was sensitive. The clinical, detached words she had heard over the years now felt like personal wounds. He died in college. My aunt, it broke her. It broke their marriage. It broke everything. The name Smith was a shield of anonymity, a statistical improbability. But the details Everett had provided, the sandy hair, the glasses, the endearing gap-toothed smile she'd seen in faded photographs, the story of a brilliant, troubled boy crushed by family expectations. It was all too specific. It was a lock that her family's tragedy fit perfectly. The ghost that had lingered at the edge of every holiday gathering, a silent testament to a potential extinguished too soon, was now standing in the center of her life. He was the foundation of the fortune that had so spectacularly and violently upended it. Jay, she choked out, the familiar, intimate name now tasting like betrayal. The man whose work you stole, whose entire legacy you erased. He was my family, my blood. The truth, raw, ugly, and irrefutable, hung between them in the sterile air of the penthouse. The fairy tale, already tarnished by blackmail and lies, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. This was no longer a story of long-lost love finding its way back. It was a grotesque tragedy, a story of profound theft and deception that now implicated her in the most personal and excruciating way imaginable. Everett stumbled backward, his body moving with a clumsy, uncoordinated gait that betrayed the utter collapse of his composure. He collided with a sleek leather sofa, collapsing onto it as if his legs could no longer support the crushing weight of his guilt. The guilt he had carried for a decade, a heavy but manageable burden, had now become an unbearable, monstrous thing, personified in the woman he claimed to love. He hadn't just wronged a nameless, faceless partner from his past. He had desecrated the memory of her own flesh and blood. "Rosalie, I didn't know," he stammered, his voice cracking, the words pathetic and useless against the enormity of his sin. "I swear to you, on my life, I had no idea." "But you still did it." The dam of her composure broke, and a decade of secondhand grief, of watching her aunt wither, of hearing the whispered sadness at family functions, erupted from her in a wave of righteous fury. "You still did it. You built your entire kingdom on his grave. You let my family believe he died with nothing to his name but a broken heart. You let them think his passion was just a hobby that led to his ruin. You could have told them. You could have given them his legacy, let them know their son's genius mattered. It could have been a comfort, a small light in their darkness. But you took it all for yourself. The weight of his confession, which had once seemed a burden shared, a secret that bound them together, was now his alone, an uncrossable chasm between them. He was no longer a sympathetic figure trapped by circumstance. He was the villain of her family's story, the architect of a pain she was only now beginning to comprehend. For the next 3 days, the penthouse, once a war room buzzing with strategic energy, became a tomb. A chasm of suffocating silence grew between them, filled with unspoken accusations and the ghosts of what might have been. The lawyers and PR teams continued their work, their voices muffled and distant through closed doors, but the heart of their strategy, the fragile, media-spun love story, was dead. Rosalie moved into a guest room at the far end of the sprawling apartment. The physical distance was a pale imitation of the emotional gulf that now separated them, a space as vast and unbridgeable as the sprawling city below. Rosalie retreated into the past. She spent hours on the phone with her mother, gently coaxing out the painful details of her cousin's life. She learned of Ben's quiet brilliance, his gentle nature, his struggles to live up to the rigid expectations of his father. She heard about the profound, unending grief that had hollowed out her Aunt Sarah, transforming her from a vibrant, laughing woman into a recluse. The divorce from Ben's father had been a quiet surrender to a shared sorrow they could no longer navigate together. Her aunt now lived a solitary life in a small town upstate, the shadow of her lost son, her only constant companion. Each detail was a fresh stab of pain, a new layer to Everett's betrayal. The Vanderbilts, like predators sensing a wounded animal, pressed their attack. Their legal team, smelling blood in the water, intensified their discovery requests, demanding access to every facet of Everett's history, from college records to his earliest company data. They didn't know the specifics of what they were looking for, but they knew a raw nerve had been struck. The silence from Everett's camp was a signal of weakness, and they exploited it ruthlessly. Finally, Diana, the formidable PR expert, called a summit. She sat them down in the cavernous living room, the space between them on the sofa, a glaring symbol of their fractured alliance. Her face was grim, her usual sharp energy replaced by a weary resolve. "The narrative is slipping," she said, her voice blunt, devoid of comfort. "The public is losing interest in the star-crossed lovers angle. It feels thin. The Vanderbilt story of a ruthless, manipulative businessman is gaining traction. This lawsuit is going to be a public crucifixion. They will dig up everything, Everett, and they will find Ben Carter." Everett, who had been staring blankly at the floor, looked up. His eyes were hollow, defeated. "It's over," he whispered. "Not necessarily," Diana countered, her strategic mind whirring, seeking a new angle, a new fight. "It's over if we keep playing their game. So we change the game. We have one card left to play. It's the nuclear option. We go public. Not with a romance, but with the truth. The whole truth." She fixed her gaze on Everett, her expression intense. "You confess everything. The stolen code, the decade of lies, the Vanderbilt blackmail. All of it. You don't spin it. You don't excuse it. You frame it as the profound mistake of a scared, ambitious young man. A mistake you've been living with and suffocating under ever since. And then you announce you're making it right. You're giving a controlling interest of your fortune, a foundation established in Ben Carter's name, to his family." Then her gaze shifted, softening almost imperceptibly as she turned to Rosalie. "And you," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "you are the catalyst for this redemption. You are not the other woman. You are the cosmic coincidence, the twist of fate that brought this entire house of cards down. You are the story's conscience. It's your family's tragedy, and because of you, he is finally trying to make it right." It was a gambit of breathtaking audacity. It would mean total public humiliation for Everett, the incineration of the reputation he had so carefully constructed. It was the end of his career, his legacy, his identity as Everett Cain, tech wunderkind. But it was also a path to a different kind of freedom, the freedom from the gilded cage of his own lies, a way to finally unburden himself. For Rosalie, it was an impossible, agonizing choice. It meant taking her family's most private, sacred wound and exposing it to the harsh, unforgiving glare of the public eye. It meant standing on a stage next to the man who had inflicted that wound, an act that felt like a betrayal of her own blood. But it also meant giving her cousin the legacy he had been so cruelly denied. It meant giving her on a truth that could, perhaps, offer a measure of peace she had been deprived of for a decade. It was a choice between protecting her family's privacy and honoring her cousin's memory. That night, surrounded by the silent, glittering lights of a city that felt a million miles away, Rosalie made a phone call, not to her mother, but directly to her Aunt Sarah. Her hand trembled as she dialed the number, her heart hammering against her ribs. With a shaky voice, she recounted the entire impossible story, the surreal string of coincidences that had led her from a simple floral job at the plaza to a devastating, life-altering truth in a billionaire's penthouse. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line, a silence so profound Rosalie thought the call had dropped. Then came a soft, ragged, weeping sound, the sound of a mother's grief, held in for years, finally cracking. It broke Rosalie's heart. The next day, her eyes red-rimmed, but her voice steady, Rosalie gave Diana her answer. The resulting press conference was an even bigger spectacle than the ruined wedding. The media descended upon the plaza's grand ballroom, a frenzied pack of reporters and camera crews. In the very room where he had thrown the ring, Everett Cain stood at a podium, not as a defiant groom, but as a penitent. He looked smaller, stripped of his power and wealth, his tailored suit hanging on him like a costume. With Rosalie standing silently by his side, a position she had chosen with great difficulty, a symbol of her role as witness and catalyst, he confessed everything. His voice, amplified by the microphones, was steady but heavy with the weight of his words. He told the world the story of Ben Carter, his friend, his partner, his ghost. He admitted his theft, his decade of lies, his cowardice. He laid bare the Vanderbilt's blackmail plot, turning their own weapon of secrets back on them with devastating force. And then, his voice cracking with emotion for the first time, he announced the formation of the Benjamin Carter Foundation for Young Innovators, a multi-billion-dollar trust dedicated to finding and supporting brilliant but underprivileged students like Ben. The foundation, he stated, would be controlled by an independent board. The chair of that board, he announced, would be Ben's mother, Sarah Smith. The fallout was immediate and explosive. The Vanderbilt lawsuit imploded under the weight of the public blackmail revelations. Their powerful name, once a symbol of untouchable prestige, was now irrevocably tarnished, synonymous with extortion and greed. The tech world was rocked by the scandal, and Everett Cain became a pariah overnight, his name erased from the very empire he had built. But in the chaotic court of public opinion, a strange and unexpected narrative began to take shape. The story was so audacious, so operatic in its tragedy and its final, desperate act of redemption, that it transcended simple scandal. Everett was no longer just a cheating groom or a corporate thief. He was a complex, tragic figure, a man who had sold his soul and was now, at immense personal cost, trying to buy it back. In the quiet aftermath, long after the last camera flash had faded, Rosalie and Everett left New York. There was no private jet, no luxury escape. He had given nearly everything away, his vast fortune now a public trust. They drove in a simple, anonymous rental car, heading north, away from the city of lies. They found Aunt Sarah in a small, modest house with a sprawling wild garden that had been allowed to grow free. She was frailer than Rosalie remembered, but her eyes, when she saw her niece, held a glimmer of light that had been extinguished for years. She looked at Everett, the man who was both the villain and the unlikely savior of her son's story. In her gaze there was no judgment, only a deep, weary understanding. She saw not a billionaire, but a broken man seeking a forgiveness he didn't believe he deserved. There was no grand, cinematic reconciliation. There was no easy absolution. There was just the slow, painful, and beautiful work of healing. There were quiet conversations on a sun-dappled porch, surrounded by the gentle scent of earth and flowers. There were tears, shed without shame. There was the sharing of old photographs of a boy with a gap-toothed smile, his genius finally, publicly, acknowledged. Rosalie didn't know what the future held for her and Everett. The dramatic love story that had started with a thrown ring was gone, replaced by something far more complex, fragile, and real. It was a bond forged not in a fairy tale romance, but in a shared, painful history and a mutual commitment to honoring a legacy. Her business was gone, her old life in New York erased, but in its place was a new, profound sense of purpose. She had given her cousin back his name. The path forward was uncertain and unwritten, but for the first time since she had arranged the first white rose in the plaza, Rosalie felt a sense of quiet peace. The suffocating perfume of a borrowed, gilded life was gone, replaced by the clean, honest air of a difficult, devastating truth. She had lost a career she loved, but she had helped a family, and perhaps even a man, find their way back to the light. In the end, it wasn't a fairy tale. There was no happily ever after waiting in a castle. It was a story about the devastating power of secrets and the incredible price of truth. A florist's life was turned upside down, a billionaire's empire crumbled, and a family's deepest wound was torn open for the world to see. But from the ashes of lies, something real was forged, a legacy restored, a conscience cleared, and a chance for healing. It proves that the most dramatic stories aren't fiction. They are the hidden truths of real lives. What would you have done in Rosalie's shoes? Let us know in the comments below. If you were captivated by this real-life drama, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a story they won't forget, and make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into the most incredible stories you've ever heard.